Well, hello, ladies. Welcome to the Ministry Check Leadership Coaching Group. We are super excited you're here, and we have with us today Judy West.
Hi, guys. I am Judy. I'm in St. Louis, and I just celebrated my 25th year here on staff at the Crossing. It's a multi-site church in St. Louis. I was, believe it or not, 1994. I'm a Philadelphia girl from the East Coast through and through. If I talk too fast, I'm a Philly girl. I was the very first non-believer to walk through the doors of our church, the very first one to be come to Christ, the very first one to be baptized. So when I came here, the only thing they knew me is the F-bomb dropping feminazi from Philadelphia. So the fact that I'm even here is hilarious. It shows how funny God is to use somebody with my past to now be in this position. It's hilarious. So what I'm going to do is give you a mini version. About a year ago, we have something every year called One Future St. Louis, where we gather churches together in St. Louis to be unified. And I was asked to give one of the 9-minute TED Talks kind of things. And it was a year or two ago, and we were just coming out of the pandemic. So I'm going to give you, if you see me looking down, I'm making sure I'm following my notes because I could very easily go rogue on this, and I want to honor your time. But let me start with a story. It was April 10th, 2020. Y'all got the day? April 10th, 2020. And my husband got a phone call. He's a head and neck surgeon, and he was at home because at that time, COVID had hit, and all of his surgeries were considered non-essential. Cancers, tubes, tonsils, thyroids, they were all considered non-essential. So he's sitting at home with me, and he gets a call asking if he would be one of the first surgeons in St. Louis in the United States to do a trach on a COVID patient. Okay. So imagine you're going, oh my gosh, my husband's about to be on the front lines. He's about to do a trach on a COVID patient. And, at that time, remember, people were washing their groceries in their garage. Remember the fear back then? Okay. So he said yes. He's called to serve humanity. He says yes. We immediately we moved him into the basement. He had his own key. I bet he changed scrubs 10 times a day. He would come home. We would bag his clothes. Do you remember that time of fear? Okay. So I watched my husband be on the front lines of this really, really scary thing. And then, as you all know, that time frame, even more was layered onto our culture, more and more trauma, more and more chaos. And the reason I start with that story is not because, oh my gosh, is she seriously going to bring up COVID again? I'm telling you that because never, ever, ever in my life did I have to choose within a second, am I going to live like Jesus or not? People were incredibly opinionated. People were incredibly heated. And here my husband is on the front lines, and people are making very bold statements about doctors and stuff. And I had seconds to choose. Am I going to choose to listen and ask curious questions? Or am I going to ramp up or shut down or hit somebody? Am I going to choose to love, or am I going to choose to hate? Am I going to choose to stay in relationship and stay in the conversation? Or am I going to choose to withdraw and cut them out of my life? Because at that time, it would have been way easier to cut them out and withdraw, because it was a heated time, if y'all remember that time in our history. And there were times I failed miserably at it. But coming out of COVID, I was reflecting back and going, the people over the last few years that the leaders especially, who I have seen thrive coming out of the last 3 years, really embraced a few important leadership principles. One of them, they never, ever, ever sacrificed their private time with God, ever. That is not subjective. You can measure it on your calendar. You can look every day. Did I spend quiet time with God? So the first thing I realized is most people who made it through protected their private time with God. The second thing is they completely embraced and leaned on their inner circle. Y'all know Jesus had his 12, but he had his 3. He had Peter and James. He leaned on them, and you can know at least 3 times of incredible crisis in his own life. Inner circle was crucial during that time. By the way, you can invite me back for free another time, Melissa. I can do a whole thing on how to develop your inner circle. Love that whole concept, how to discern who is in your inner circle. And then the last big thing I learned was the people that made it through and thrived were the ones that knew how to listen well and ask really, really curious questions. So that's where I want to camp out for the next few minutes. If you want to sometime Google on your own time, Harvard Business Review, it's the May and June 2018 issue. And the author talked about questioning. Questioning is a uniquely powerful tool for unlocking value in organizations. Number one, spurs learning. Number two, helps with the exchange of ideas. 3, fuels innovation. 4, helps with performance, team performance. 5, builds rapport and trust among team members. And then this last one I thought was interesting. When you ask curious questions, they quote it can mitigate business risk by uncovering unforeseen pitfalls and hazards. Basically, what that means, if you ask curious questions, you can prevent people from stepping on landmines. So if HBR says that for the corporate world, imagine how that applies to the body of Christ. Imagine what asking curious questions can do within the body of Christ. So this is a huge part of all culture. You can hear people say, we haven't asked curious questions. We haven't asked curious questions. So I asked a bunch of our volunteers, not even staff. I asked our volunteers a couple of years ago when I was prepping for this. It's in your DNA to ask curious questions. What would you tell somebody have been the benefits for you for asking curious questions? And these were the answers. I've been able to get to know people's stories at a deeper level. It helps tear down walls. It fosters unity. It helps build relationships. It helps me gain clarity and understanding of where the person's coming from. I can get to the thing behind the thing behind the thing by asking curious questions. It helps me uncover wounds that need to be healed by Jesus. Somebody said, it makes people feel known, heard, and seen. And then somebody else, which is my favorite answer, is when you stop to ask curious questions, you could absolutely have the potential of leading somebody to Jesus. Like instead of just jumping in with a Bible answer or whatever, you could actually have the opportunity to lead somebody to Jesus. So if relationships are important to you, then asking curious questions should be at the very, very top of your list for relationship building. So I think Melissa said, I hope you all have the piece of paper. Here are just some basic 101s on what it talks when it comes to asking curious questions. I'm sure you all know this, but the biggest reason I love teaching this session is this is something you can take and copy and lead your staff through. It's so add water and stir, it's ridiculous, okay? So first of all, and by the way, we're about to role play, so get ready. When you ask curious questions, try to start with how or what or when or where. Try to avoid why. Why did you do that? Makes people put on the boxing gloves, puts their defenses up. Try as hard as can not to ask why. Try to ask open-ended questions instead of just yes or no, stop a conversation right away. Did you like school? Yes. The conversation's over. Tell me what you liked about school can keep the conversation going, okay? Oh my gosh, if you want to watch this one play out, watch somebody interview in an HR interview setting. Try to ask one question at a time, not 2, not 3, not 4, one question at a time. Let the person respond to the question. Don't add your input. Let them respond. And then your next question should be based off of their answer, how they responded. Okay. And keep going down that line. I'll tell you a cool story in just a second about an HR expert that taught me something, but your next question should be based off of their answer, not another question you have in your head off of what they just said. And then obviously pray the entire time under your breath, Lord, help me listen well and help me ask a question based off their answer. So down below it says examples of curious questions. I would also say curious statements that would lead to answers. Okay. So what led you to answer that way? When you said or did this, what happened next? I would love to hear more about it. If you're comfortable, tell me more. What did you mean when you said? What happened next? What did you learn? What emotion did you feel when that happened? When did you first feel that? How did that make you feel? How did the person respond? You get the gist. You can go through it. I put the last few on there. What would you like to hear from me now? How can I best serve you right now? And what do you need? for me right now, those of you, the pastors in the group, these are key ones I will ask at the end of a pastoral one-on-one. So Stephanie, we've been meeting for an hour right now. What do you think you need to hear from me? It's amazing what people will answer. Stephanie could say, I just need you to tell me I'm not crazy, or I need you to pray over me. I need you. People normally know what they need to hear, and oftentimes they just need the encouragement. I would encourage you, any of you in pastoral one-on-ones, use one of those questions at the very end of your pastoral or counseling time, okay? So here we go. Now the fun part. Tip, when I did One Future St. Louis, everybody broke up into twos and they role played with each other, but we're going to do it as a group. The question I asked, and Melissa's going to be it for me right now. The question I asked at One Future St. Louis is, as a child, what was your least favorite holiday? Okay, so Melissa, unmute. Here, her and I just did this a few minutes ago. Melissa?
Just confess, I totally was not prepared for it. And quite honestly, it took me a little bit, because we're going to get real and really raw with each other. So I'm just going to let you know. So go ahead and ask me the question again. Yeah.
Okay. So Melissa, as a child, what was your least favorite holiday?
So at first I would normally say, I love all holidays. I love gifts and all of that good stuff. But
and so she did that to me.
I
and I
did.
said to her, what led you to answer all holidays? To which she responded,
well, actually not all holidays, because I said, when you're talking about a kid, are you talking about like elementary school or adolescence? Because
I said to her, good question. What I said, it doesn't matter. You pick. Yeah. What was your least favorite holiday growing up?
So at that point I said Valentine's Day.
And I said to her then, and I said, so what led you to answer Valentine's Day being your least favorite holiday?
Well, in elementary school, it was great because everybody got cards and candy and we decorated boxes. But by middle school, people liked people. And I am an ugly duckling. And so I did not become a swan until I became a grown woman. So middle school was not fun at Valentine's Day.
So on February 14th, when you were in middle school on Valentine's Day, what was the major emotion you felt on that day?
Dude, sadness, embarrassment, maybe shame, maybe who knows, but seeing other people get Valentine's and you're not getting anything or have somebody special kind of stinks.
Okay, so see, I could keep going. And she's already warned me. She's like, stop, I'm going to cry.
I'm like, this is not fun.
So when I did this at One Future, I pulled a guy up and I said, we're going to do this really fast. And I said, what was your least favorite holiday? And he said, Halloween. Okay, so very quickly, Sky, unmute for a second. This is a Jesus follower pastor. Give me a reason you would think he would answer Halloween.
Because he was told he wasn't allowed to celebrate.
Okay.
Because it was a negative holiday.
Okay. Sonia, unmute. Tell me why you think. So this is a pastor that said Halloween. Why do you think he might say Halloween?
I would have said the same as Sky, but maybe he had no friends to trick or treat with.
Okay. Tanya, unmute. Why do you think a pastor might say Halloween?
Maybe because he always struggled with creativity on what to dress up as and what character to play.
Okay, so I asked him, so Anthony, what was your least favorite holiday? Halloween. What led you to say Halloween? And he said, because we lived in New York. And I said, what about New York led you Halloween to be your least favorite holiday? And he said, because we had to stay on our apartment floor. And who said you had to stay on your apartment floor? My mother. What led your mother to say you had to stay on your apartment floor? And she said, because New York was really dangerous and I wasn't allowed to leave our apartment floor. So when you couldn't leave your apartment floor on Halloween, how did you feel? And he said, I resented my mother horribly. It was a holiday. I ended up resenting my mom because all of my friends would get all this candy and I only got a few pieces because I had to stay on my floor. So Halloween to me associated with being resentful of my mom, and I hated resenting my mom. Isn't it amazing? So I pulled up somebody else and I said, what was your least favorite holiday as a child? And she said, oh, every holiday. Arbor Day. We loved every holiday. And I said, so tell me what led you to answer that. And she said, because it was the only time my family was happy. And I said, do you feel comfortable giving me a few more sentences? And she said, every day I grew up in a violent environment. And when my dad's car pulled in the driveway, I would lock myself in the bedroom. Holidays were the only time I didn't lock myself in the bedroom because my dad wasn't violent on holidays. That's how deep you can go. That was just 3 or 4 few questions. Does that make sense? So that's the power of asking questions. So what I want to do right now is you guys now, let me tell a story. So this HR expert, I'll tell you guys this. It was the HR guy from Chick-fil-A. And he worked with our women's executive pastor group years ago. And one of the things he said is, really good interviewers and curious, especially when you're in an interview setting, you should only ask one question. And then what you do is you listen to their answer and ask the next one and ask the next one and ask the next one and ask the next one. He said, really good interviewers don't keep asking random questions. They listen to what the person says and keep asking questions. Okay. We now affectionately call it Chick-fil-A-ing somebody. So that's when you Chick-fil-A somebody, just ask them one question and keep asking. So Melissa, let's do this. You're going to ask me a question. So you're the interviewer. You're going to ask me a question, and you are all part of the interview team. You're listening to my response, and then you're going to ask a question based off of how I responded. All right, Melissa, what's your interview question?
Well, I'm going to go with today. We're celebrating this week 25 years at the Crossing. What has been the thing that you are most proud of during your time at the Crossing?
I would say one of the things I'm most proud of is our Go Lead manual.
What about that? Why would you say that? What about that manual makes you feel proud?
I built it from scratch because I felt like it was a need for our staff to be unified.
So what from that, there was a need to make the staff feel unified. What was happening that contributed to that need?
So all of our managers were managing very differently. So like one manager would meet with their people every week, one manager every month, and it was causing disunity within the staff and some contention.
With that disunity, how did that impact you, Judy?
Good question. So when there wasn't unity with the managers, people would end up at my door and it was draining. So it would end up with a lot of not arguing, but conflict, because there was no central managing ground to operate from. So I was doing a lot of conflict resolution when I felt like I didn't need to.
How does it make you feel when you have to do conflict resolution?
Exhausted.
What's exhausting about conflict resolution for you?
That I feel like these people are grown-ups and they should be able to do it on their own.
I want to ask, what did you experience as you were trying to bring the group together for this manual?
Oh, that's great. That's great. Believe it or not, I feel like people were relieved. Mm. There was finally common rules and common playing ground. Great question.
Tell me more about the experience of why they feel relieved versus something that they didn't feel relieved prior to this.
I felt relieved because people weren't standing at my door. Because of Go Lead manual, we now had a template to operate off of. And I could focus on other things.
What things were you able to focus on now?
Oh, great. I could then turn my attention to how we're going to train and equip our pastoral team instead of our managers. Great. You guys got it? So all you were doing was listening to how I was answering. So let me pause right there. Any questions about that process?
Have you ever gotten stuck, and how do you get unstuck? Like if somebody gives you an answer and you're like, okay, what kind of question could follow up from that?
Brilliant. My number one question or statement I always have is, could you give me 2 more sentences? I'm not in your brain fully yet. Give me 2 more sentences. And typically that can take you somewhere.
How do you balance the amount of questions with the like curious statements or like covering or connecting to what they've said?
Well, I think that's where the number one, where the Holy Spirit comes in. Listening to the Holy Spirit as you're leading this, watching their nonverbals is really important. But the one of the big reasons, let me just tell you my story right now. One of the reasons I love Chick-fil-A-ing people is we were interviewing a youth candidate for a youth pastor position. And my question was what Melissa just asked. Out of your years of being a youth pastor, what would you define to be your most successful idea you launched? And he goes, oh, Judy, that's easy. It was a worship night we had last year. I go, great. Take me back to the beginning of the worship night last year. Tell me, first of all, where the idea started. So I had him dissect every little point for 20 minutes. At the end of 20 minutes, this is what I said. I said, Joe, let me get this straight. I've asked you 20 minutes of questions about your most successful youth event. What I heard you say was that your 18-year-old neighbor came to you next door, knocked on the door, said she wanted to pull off a youth worship night. She recruited teams, she trained teams, she developed it. She pulled the entire thing off herself. She did it all. Help me understand your role in the this worship night. And he goes, I said yes. And the interview ended. So he did not do one thing, not one thing, not one. If I would have just stopped at what was your, because he had said they doubled it or tripled in number in one night from a youth worship event, I would have been like, oh, we're bringing on staff, this guy. He did nothing, you guys. He did not do one part of the entire night. If I would not have asked him 20 minutes of questions, I thought he would have been a rock star. He didn't do anything. Does that make sense? Lauren, did I answer your question?
That was a helpful answer, but I think I'm kind of more drawing into the point of like if you're getting to a deep place with a person and you mentioned the Holy Spirit, I think that's great, and body language, but I was just hoping you would speak more to the dance, I guess, of asking a question and then conveying what you're hearing them say, making statements rather than it just being an assault, for lack of better terms, an assault of questions to someone.
Oh,
so they don't feel interrogated, I guess.
Well, okay. So the one I just used, that was for an interview setting. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that you guys were talking to me as if I was an interview candidate. For those of you who do pastoral interviews, you're right. That's where the engaging and being real and present. And yes, you don't want a full-on assault. Yeah, you don't want that. But most of the times, you guys, those of you that are pastors know, when somebody sits down with you, their presenting issue is typically not the real thing they need to address. And that is why curious questions are crucial, because you could mislead somebody if you don't take time to ask the questions. That's why I'm a huge fan of training pastors, because you could spiritually mislead somebody if you don't get to the thing behind the thing, behind the thing, behind the thing of why they're even asking the question in the first place. So, but Lauren, I would phrase it's an art form, not a science.
Can I add something, please?
Yes.
I think that what Lauren probably mean, and I do that in my practice, is I do ask questions, but I also paraphrase a lot, because I need to clarify that what I'm hearing is correct. You know what I mean? Because hearing and listening sometimes has a gap in between. So asking for clarification, tell me what you mean, or tell me a little bit more, or describe this thing or something. Am I hearing it correctly? To have checkpoints, I think then does not sound like an assault. It's really like you're engaging with the person.
Yeah. And what's the word you used? Because I use paraphrasing or parroting back. Yes. Is this what I heard you say? Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, I want to jump in also because I hear what Lauren said. I also get what you're doing. And I think honestly, it's contextual. And it's so out of the box because anybody, I've been done interviews and stuff for years. You have a whole sheet of things that you want to ask, and you don't actually go any further. And honestly, there's a couple of hires that if I had asked some of these curious questions, I would not have hired the people that I hired because the questions I had were not actually good questions. Does that make sense? So they weren't the real questions, because people can give you the answer that you want to hear, right? But I'm also thinking about this in context of staffs that we're leading, people that are coming into our office that have issues or problems or concerns, and I hear what Lauren's also saying. There's different layers of this. In an interview process, it's totally different. In a pastoral, somebody in your church, it's totally different. But the what behind the what behind the what, I think, has been the aha for me of, okay, so whatever context I'm in, getting to the what behind the what behind the what of what's actually being said, that comes from the questions and actually listening instead of preparing the next question. And using some of the things that Lena even said, and parroting and paraphrasing, and it's so hard to do that because we have this list of things that we need to ask or address that sometimes we forget. It's not about just checking off things. It's about the person in the situation that we're dealing with. So I don't know if anything makes sense, but
the place this is most important is marriage, children, and friendship. So my kids, when they would get home from school, I can ask, did you have a good day today? Yes, no. And the conversation's over. Or I can choose to ask, what was your favorite part of today? Was there any part of today you struggled with? My marriage, did you have a good day? Yep. And we're done. So that's the power of questions, is questions help develop relationships. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes worth. I mean, I can ask my husband 3 questions and we can, I don't have to Chick-fil-A my husband every day. But it just helps develop relationships. And going back to the very beginning, the why this was crucial is because back in 2020, when people were saying medical people don't know what they're talking about with COVID, my husband's on the front lines. And I had the choice. Am I going to ask you? So tell me, you made that statement. Where'd that statement come from? Let me crawl in your head. It was the only way I could get to somebody's heart without getting angry and lashing out. So that's the power of the curious question. And that's why this is so important to me. But yes, the basic ones are with friendships and relationships.
Since you mentioned that your husband was in the medical field, you know how they have this thing about rating the scale of your pain management from 1 to 10. I found that using that question or the statement with my question, because I question a lot of my clients all the time. It's different, but it's a ministry too, because, I may talk to them about their money and their finances, but there's always moments when they become very vulnerable with the right questions, that it opens a way for me to minister to them and talk about Jesus, not in like Jesus bashing, but in a more kinder way, right? So if they were talking about an emotion, I found that the scale of 1 to 10 helps, because you probably also have people that come for counseling and they say, I'm feeling depressed today. And instead of saying, why do you feel depressed, or what's making you depressed? You could say, okay, from a scale from 1 to 10, how high or how low is your depression? And then from there, you can kind of gauge, right? And then you can kind of ask questions that are more relevant if they're saying an 8 out of 10 versus a 4 out of 10, correct? So
and Lena, so that's great. And my main thing is what happens is people will say, rate your scale, and then they'll go, so where are you going on vacation? And my whole thing is just keep going down the road. Most people want you to keep going down the road. Just don't jump around like this. See if you can bring those curious questions, help deepen relationships, and get to answers that need to be surfaced.
Yeah, that's good. And I think you're right. I think a lot of times people do want you to ask. They just don't either want to ask you to ask, or they don't want to seem vulnerable. Let me ask you this, Judy, because I'm thinking, okay, that's great. Kids, marriage, friendships and stuff, but how does this work so we're not in a hiring place. We just work. We work at a church. So what does this look like with those above us? because sometimes we're given things and we don't, or sometimes we pick up things because somebody's in a mood or whatever. How can we utilize this idea, right, of asking curious questions to lead up?
Our entire staff, using even curious questions is a terminology we all use, from the facility person to the lead pastor. So it could be somebody comes to you, it's like, hey, before we go any further, can I ask you some curious questions because I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing? Or do I have permission to push back because I'm really busy right now? So it's from the top down to the facility team that all ask curious questions. So with that said, can you give me an example?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, let's talk about somebody that's mid-level leadership at their organization. They have a few people under them. They lead some teams. They have all of that, but then they're not at the decision-making table. So they're getting orders and things kind of pushed down to them. And sometimes it can be with an attitude. Sometimes it can feel like hard, heavy, or just directive. And they have questions about it, but don't feel like they can ask further questions without rocking the apple cart.
Okay, I'm going to say this. All of what you're talking about is emotional health, and that starts at the top down. So if there's a lead pastor that doesn't allow this, it's very hard to get through your culture. So I'll start there. So if you don't have a lead team that embraces question asking stuff, this is going to be tough. But I do think even mid-level people can start with basic things like, hey, before we make that decision, can I ask some clarifying questions? Those are super safe things to say. Like, so you guys want to pull off a picnic this Sunday. Before we do, could I just ask some clarifying questions? Like, could anybody tell me, was there a reason this Sunday was decided versus next Sunday? I want to get my brain around it. So I think questions like that, do I have permission to ask? Can I ask a few more questions? Can you give me some insight? Help with mid-level people to lead up.
And you're right. It has to be an environment. I mean, if it's not an environment where you can ask the question, you're just gonna, you're inviting a lot more trouble for yourself. Okay, so same person, right? Mid-level, not at the table, but they have teams, they lead, they're leading within their giftedness, but they have people on their teams. Now they've gotten this information and they have to disseminate it out to their teams. And now their teams are struggling. How can they help their teams get on board, but also be a place where their teams can ask questions? So can they, even if it's not up, can they take it down and flesh it out?
I hope so. But if you do that, so the number one thing is, hey guys, but ask me questions right now. When you, the leader, are proactive, it totally sets the tone for the team. So if you're like, ask away, ask anything, and then you better be open for it, and gently receive it. Thank you for asking that. Thank you for asking that. Thank you for asking that. So I feel like the leader has to set the tone for that.
Okay. Yeah.
That's my experience, at least. Anybody else? There are people here with way more experience than me. You guys speak up. But I think it starts, by the way, every year during our annual review process, I do this 2 or 3 times a year with my downlines. It's on paper. What do you want me to keep doing, stop doing, start doing? Gives people permission to speak truth to you. Most people under us need permission to speak truth. In a safe way. In a safe way.
You have questions? This is your time.
This is it. I made sure I blew through this fast so you guys had time. I covered all the basic essentials for you. But this is one of those I always recommend. Start with literally starting a conversation tonight and just see how far you can get in a conversation without switching topics. It's fascinating. You can go pretty deep and learn some interesting things by just asking a question to the question to the question. Side note, we had a pastor once. She would get in this, like, somebody emailed and they wanted to know what's the biblical answer for divorce. So she would spend a week prepping and doing all of her research. What's the biblical answer for divorce? So she learned curious questions. She would sit down and say, hey, tell me your story. What led you to ask about the biblical stance on divorce? The person didn't want a Bible answer. The person wanted to share their story about the trauma they went through with their divorce. And she said, I just learned, I ripped up my notes and I went in. All I had to do was ask curious questions. If they needed a theology answer, I'd have my Bible next to me and we would dig in. But Melissa, you said it. Most people want to talk about themselves. They're coming to you because they want to talk.
Yeah.
In the pastorate, they want to talk.
Yeah.
Just ask them questions.
Well, and we assume, let me just say, we assume that it's people in our congregation. It's the people we work with too, and us. So just being aware that this care is not just for these curious questions, this relationship is not just for the people that you're called to serve in your congregation. It's the people around you that you're doing life with as well.
Yeah.
Because you and I both know there's a lot of people in ministry that are hurt and just limping by right now. So just being aware of that as well.
I'm the kind of person where I might have two related questions.
Mhm.
So how do I know which one is better to ask? So I'm only asking questions one at a time.
As long as it's one at a time, I think you're fine. Yeah. And that's where prayer comes in. Lord, which one should I? Yeah. I don't think you can go wrong. All I curious questions is just about is, can you ask an open-ended, another question to keep, just your goal is
Okay.
to keep the conversation going.
Okay.
That's all this means. Curious questions keeps the conversation going. And then all the things that I said it does. And then everything I read from HBR and what people said.
It also,
Okay.
Stephanie, gets to the heart.
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Gets to the heart.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Judy, what was number 3 again? Because you went through those HBR things pretty fast, and I
Okay.
write fast, but that was
Okay.
even...
Yeah. Sorry. So HBR said spurs learning, exchange of ideas, fuels innovation, performance improvement, rapport and trust, and mitigates business risk. And guys, full disclosure, like I struggle with this just as much as every other human. I spent the last 24 hours cleaning up a mess because I did not ask enough curious questions. So I cannot overemphasize how important this is. I asked a certain level of them, but I didn't go deep enough. So there's a group of people standing at my door so we can finish the conversation. But asking, I asked the first layer, but I didn't get through enough with enough people to say, okay, walk me through how this transpired. So please don't think I'm an expert in this.
Being a new lead pastor, we have our first anniversary this month. I've
Yay!
found myself, thank you. I found myself where I get nervous to ask a question because I'm worried the answer, I'm not a good enough leader, or it's going to be a growing moment at the cost of that other person. And so I have to remind myself I'm called, anointed, and all those things, say, Holy Spirit, help me, and go slow. But still, I get nervous to ask the questions because I know that I'm learning. What do you do in those moments? How do you overcome? How do you do that?
Okay, so you ready? Unmute.
Okay.
Okay, ready? Stephanie, you just stated you're afraid to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a time when you asked a question and it came back to bite you in the booty.
I cannot think of one.
Okay, so you couldn't think of an answer. Okay.
Yeah.
So talk to me then about the fear. Give me a few more sentences on the fear.
Okay. I am a firstborn, people pleaser, type A. I totally know I have to choose courage. I totally know women in leadership, kind of that whole story. I've experienced verbal abuse growing up, like all your like your typical like boxes checked off that story. I relate to so much of that, and that would contribute to this. And so I want people to like me, and I often will apologize, like, sorry, this is what the Bible says. Like, don't hate me. And so that's where that comes from. That's that feeling.
Okay. Tell me a time when you did something that made somebody not like you.
Okay. A long time ago, this was the first one that popped up in my head. I was a new children's pastor, and there was someone before me. They were gone. And I was like remodeling the room, and I threw something away that a volunteer brought and like had contributed under the old children's pastor. And I threw it away, and I didn't know that they had brought it. I was just cleaning out like the clutter and it wasn't being used. But the pastor was friends with the volunteer. And so the volunteer was upset, and then the pastor got upset. So
the pastor got upset with you.
Yes,
in what way?
Because the volunteer, I was brought into the office and corrected that I should have asked that specific volunteer. But like, curious question is, I have to go through all of the inventory and ask all of the volunteers if I can throw these things away. And so I was trying to stand up for myself. And also I didn't ask the volunteer if I could throw the thing away. I didn't know I needed to do that.
Okay. So first of all, did everybody just learn something about Stephanie? If I had 3 more hours, Stephanie, I would seriously, this is what's so remarkable, is that here you are in a senior level position, and something so small that happened to you led to you being exhorted and corrected. And that little thing now has become a giant in your brain, and it's causing you to question your leadership. So if I had 12 more hours, I'd keep asking you questions. And I just want to say, for the sake of time, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you, because you're right. You're right. I'm sorry. And my only last thing before Melissa tells me to shut up is, I would ask you to go before the throne and say, Lord, I'm forgiving that pastor for doing that to me. And I'm choosing on this day to forgive him for planting those seeds of doubt in my brain, because it's impacting my leadership.
Thank you.
I would do some major forgiveness with you and God.
Okay.
Because that stinks. And I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else have goosebumps? And can I tell you, it feels super, like Judy totally caught me off guard when we were starting, and because we meet before we go live and everything, and I felt so vulnerable and naked. It just, there's like, I'm trying to think of a different word, just exposed to some of the questions. I'm like, wait, no, I don't want to go here. Like, what are we doing? We're gonna, do these things. So I think there is power in these curious questions, and I think there is wisdom and discernment needed as to when and how to use them. And so, Judy, thank you for illuminating us. I even go back to some of the things that you said in the beginning about the benefits of the questioning. And I think, just as we kind of let you go handle some of your own curious question situations, is just remembering the heart of it. And I love the backbone of this from the HBR, even just realizing it spurs learning, it's an exchange of ideas, it fuels innovation, team performance improvement. These are all things like filtering through, mitigate unforeseen pitfalls, rapport and trust. Like, these are all things that we can take and tweak and use in our leadership, no matter where we fall on the org chart. Or even if we're on the org chart, we can apply them to different areas of our life. So thank you for just bringing awareness to the fact that that we can ask these questions in layers, instead of having a whole sheet, like, which is probably statistically how we've done it our whole life, a whole sheet of questions that we have to go through for HR of what we need to ask, but we actually don't get anywhere but an inch.
Right.
So thank you for sharing that with us today. That was incredibly grateful.
One last thing, and Stephanie, by the way, I was watching her face the whole time. If she started, I would have literally said, if you don't feel comfortable, don't answer. Don't. So just so you know, that's when I'm in a pastoral thing. Do I have permission to ask this? And if not, you have permission to say no. So just so please don't think I'm a bulldozer. I always, especially I'm watching their face, I would have said, nope, don't answer. It's okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted you to know that.
Well, and I'll just, because I know Judy so well, can you just tell me, like, the top leadership at your church? I think you said everybody has counseling background. So So this is
even our lead pastor has his master's in counseling. Yeah.
okay. So this is across the board important. So this is
Mm-hmm.
he's not when she can. Judy's just a strong personality also. So it might feel like that. That is not the heart. And
Mhm.
knowing that her whole leadership team has this counseling under
Mhm.
them is I've never seen anything like it. I've never heard of another church like it. And so I appreciate the fact that that is part of your DNA at your organization, and it goes from top to bottom and out. So thank you for your leadership, and just 25 years, Judy, 25 years. That's amazing. And just to hear from beginning to where you are and what God's done. So thank you for sharing that journey with us.